The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor at the exact moment Sarah Mitchell's world fell apart. "Get your hands off my husband, you pathetic cow." The downtown Manhattan coffee shop fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the espresso machine. Sarah lay sprawled on the cold floor, her 6-month pregnant belly exposed beneath her cream-colored sweater, the overturned chair beside her like evidence of a crime. Above her stood a woman in designer heels, blonde hair perfectly styled, fury radiating from every pore of her 28-year-old face. "Victoria, enough," Robert Mitchell's voice cut through the shocked silence. But Sarah heard something else in his tone. Not anger at his mistress, embarrassment at being caught. Sarah struggled to push herself up, her movements awkward with the weight of the baby she'd never planned to carry at 48. The business crowd that frequented this upscale coffee spot stared openly now, phones already emerging from pockets and purses. She could almost hear the social media posts being composed, "Millionaire's wife attacked by mistress in broad daylight." "Don't you dare tell me enough," Victoria Lawson snarled, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm tired of pretending this cow matters. You promised me you'd handle this situation months ago. Handle this situation." Sarah finally made it to her feet, one hand protectively cradling her belly. 22 years of marriage reduced to a situation that needed handling. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" A young barista with kind eyes approached cautiously. "Should I call an ambulance?" Sarah looked at her husband of over 2 decades. Robert stood there in his $1,000 suit, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his face showing more concern for his reputation than for his pregnant wife who'd just been assaulted. At 52, he still turned heads, still commanded respect in boardrooms across the city, still made her feel like the luckiest woman alive, or had until 3 months ago. "I'm fine," Sarah said quietly, though her hip throbbed where it had struck the floor. "Just clumsy, I suppose." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Clumsy, is that what we're calling it? You deliberately sat in that chair to cause a scene. Classic manipulation, just like Bobby warned me about." "Bobby." Sarah's heart clenched. Nobody had called Robert Bobby since college. Nobody except her, in their most intimate moments, in the early years when he'd whispered promises about growing old together. "Victoria." Robert's voice carried a warning now, but not the kind a husband should use when defending his wife. This was the voice of a man worried about witnesses, about damage control, about stock prices in board meetings. What? Victoria's blue eyes blazed. "Everyone already knows. Robert, stop pretending this is some big secret. Half of Manhattan society knows you're leaving her for me." The coffee shop seemed to shrink around Sarah. She became aware of every stare, every whispered conversation, every phone camera pointed in her direction. These people would go home tonight and tell their families about the pregnant woman who'd been humiliated in public by her husband's mistress. They'd shake their heads and wonder how a wife could let herself be so blind. But Sarah wasn't blind anymore. 3 months ago, when Dr. Jennifer Walsh had told her she was pregnant, Sarah had felt like the universe was giving her one last gift, a surprise baby at 48, when she'd thought her childbearing years were long behind her. Robert's daughter, Emma, now 24 and living in Los Angeles, had been thrilled at the prospect of a baby sister or brother. "Mom," Emma had said during their video call, "this is like a miracle baby. Dad must be over the moon." Sarah had thought so too. At first, Robert had seemed shocked but pleased, talking about cribs and college funds and how this baby would keep them young. He'd even joked about being a father again in his 50s, said it would give him something to brag about at the country club. Now she understood. Robert had never been happy about the baby. He'd been calculating. "Mrs. Mitchell." The young barista was still hovering nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding in her workplace. "Are you sure you don't need medical attention? You took quite a fall." "She's fine," Victoria snapped before Sarah could respond. "She's just being dramatic. It's what she does." Sarah looked at this woman who claimed to know her so well. Victoria Lawson, 28 years old, MBA from Wharton. Daddy's construction empire worth $30 million. Sarah had done her research in the weeks since she'd discovered the affair. Victoria was everything Sarah had been 25 years ago: ambitious, beautiful, certain the world owed her everything she wanted. The difference was that Sarah had earned Robert's love. Victoria was simply taking it. Actually, Sarah said, her voice stronger now, I think I do need to sit down. The baby. She said it deliberately, watching Robert's face. There it was, the flash of annoyance he tried to hide. The baby was an inconvenience, a complication in his midlife transformation. Victoria's eyes narrowed with something that looked like hatred. Of course, the barista said quickly, gesturing toward a booth in the corner. Please, let me help you. As Sarah made her way carefully across the coffee shop, she heard Victoria's voice behind her, lower now but still audible. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Bobby, she's going to milk this pregnancy for everything it's worth. You need to file for divorce before she gets any bigger, before the courts start feeling sorry for her. Sarah sank into the booth, her hands trembling as she reached for her phone. She needed to call someone, but who? Her sister lived in California. Her parents had passed away years ago. Her closest friends were all part of the same social circle as Robert, the same crowd that would be dissecting this scene over dinner parties for weeks to come. Rebecca Thompson, her college roommate, the one friend who'd never been impressed by Robert's money or status. Rebecca, who'd become a divorce attorney in Boston and spent her career helping women like Sarah rebuild their lives. Sarah's fingers moved across her phone screen as the conversation continued behind her. You're being ridiculous, Robert was saying. Sarah's my wife, the mother of my children. This isn't how civilized people handle these things. Civilized, Victoria's laugh was sharp. There's nothing civilized about a middle-aged woman trapping a man with a pregnancy. She knew exactly what she was doing. Sarah's thumb hovered over Rebecca's number. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. No pretending this was just a rough patch. No hoping that Robert would come to his senses and remember the life they'd built together. But as she listened to her husband discuss their 22-year marriage like it was a business deal gone wrong, Sarah realized there was nothing left to go back to. She pressed call. Pregnant. Robert's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips, steam rising between them in their sun-drenched breakfast nook. At 48, Sarah had practiced this conversation in her head a dozen times during the drive home from Dr. Walsh's office. She'd imagined surprise, joy, concern for her health, maybe even tears. She hadn't expected the careful calculation that flickered across her husband's face. I know it's unexpected, Sarah said, settling into the chair across from him. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, their Westchester County estate stretched toward the horizon, 10 acres of perfectly manicured lawns and gardens that had taken her years to design. Dr. Walsh says everything looks normal so far. The baby's due in January. Robert set down his cup with mathematical precision, the way he did everything. Even his morning routine was choreographed: coffee at 7:15, Wall Street Journal from 7:20 to 7:45, departure for the city at exactly 8 o'clock. How is this possible? He asked. You're 48. Sarah, we haven't exactly been trying for children. There was something in his tone that made her chest tighten. Not the warm surprise she'd hoped for, but something cooler, more distant. Dr. Walsh says it happens more often than people think, Sarah said carefully. My mother had my brother when she was 46. Remember, and with all the advances in prenatal care, that was different. Robert picked up his phone, scrolling through emails with the same focused attention he'd been giving her moments before. Your mother didn't have other priorities. Career considerations. Career considerations? Sarah felt her voice rise slightly. Robert, you're the CEO of your own company. You can make your own schedule. And I left my practice years ago to focus on Emma and the house. What career considerations? He looked up from his phone then, and for a moment, she saw something she didn't recognize in his eyes. Something that looked almost like resentment. Things are complicated right now at Mitchell Holdings, he said finally. We're in the middle of a major acquisition. The board is breathing down my neck about quarterly projections. This isn't exactly the time for personal complications. Personal complications. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her still flat belly. Their child, a personal complication. I see. She kept her voice level, the way she'd learned to do during the difficult years when Robert was building his company, when stress made him sharp and distant. Well, the baby won't be here until January. That gives us 8 months to adjust. Robert's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with obvious relief. I have to take this, he said, already standing. It's Peterson from the Hong Kong office. He left the breakfast nook without kissing her goodbye, already deep in conversation about market fluctuations and currency exchanges. Sarah sat alone among the remnants of their careful morning routine, watching a cardinal build its nest in the oak tree outside their window. She should have felt happy. They'd tried for years to give Emma a sibling, before finally accepting that one child was enough. This baby was a gift, an unexpected blessing that would complete their family in a way she'd stopped dreaming about. Instead, she felt hollow. Her phone rang, Emma's face filling the screen with her brilliant smile. Sarah's daughter had inherited Robert's dark hair and strong jaw, but her eyes were Sarah's, warm brown with flecks of gold. Mom, perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. Emma's voice carried the energy of someone who'd found her place in the world. At 24, she was already making a name for herself as a documentary filmmaker in Los Angeles, following stories that mattered to her with the same determination Robert brought to business deals. Hi, sweetheart. Sarah managed a smile that Emma couldn't see but might hear in her voice. How's the new project coming? Incredible. We're following 3 women who started their own businesses after 50. Mom, you should see these women. They're warriors. One of them left her husband after 30 years and started a bakery with her divorce settlement. She's making more money now than she ever did as a housewife. Sarah's chest tightened. That sounds fascinating. It is. There's this whole movement of women reinventing themselves later in life. Society tells us we're invisible after 50, but these women are proving that wrong every day. Emma paused. Mom, you sound weird. Everything okay? Sarah looked around the breakfast nook, with its custom millwork and hand-painted tiles, its view of grounds that cost more to maintain than most people's salaries. This house had been her project for 10 years, her canvas when Robert told her she didn't need to work anymore. Actually, I have some news, Sarah said. I'm pregnant. The silence stretched so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped. Pregnant? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Mom, are you serious? Very serious. Due in January. Oh my God. Sarah could hear Emma moving around, probably pacing her tiny Santa Monica apartment the way she did when she was excited. Mom, this is incredible. A baby dad must be losing his mind with happiness. Sarah glanced toward Robert's study, where she could hear his voice rising and falling in conference call cadences. He's processing. Processing, Mom. You're having a baby. This is the best news ever. I'm going to be a big sister again. Oh my God, I have to come home. When can I come home? Emma's joy was infectious, and for the first time since Dr. Walsh had confirmed the pregnancy, Sarah felt a genuine smile spread across her face. Whenever you want her, sweetheart, you know you're always welcome. I'm booking a flight tonight. This is so exciting. Mom, a little brother or sister? Are you hoping for a boy or a girl? Healthy, Sarah said automatically. Just healthy. But as she listened to Emma make plans for her visit, Sarah found herself hoping for a daughter. Another Emma, another bright spirit who could fill the spaces that had grown quiet in their house over the years. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the breakfast nook for a long time, listening to the sounds of her house. The grandfather clock in the foyer chiming the hour, the soft hum of the air conditioning system, the distant murmur of Robert's voice as he solved other people's problems with his trademark efficiency. She should call her doctor, schedule the necessary appointments, start taking prenatal vitamins. She should research the latest recommendations for pregnancy after 45, read about the risks and precautions that would shape the next 8 months of her life. Instead, she found herself thinking about Emma's documentary, about women who reinvented themselves after 50. Sarah had been 26 when she'd married Robert, 30 when she'd given birth to Emma, 35 when she'd sold her interior design practice to focus on being a full-time mother and wife. Now she was 48 and pregnant, married to a millionaire husband who saw their child as a personal complication. At what point, she wondered, had she stopped being Sarah Mitchell the person and become Sarah Mitchell the accessory? Her phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Dinner with Peterson tonight. Don't wait up. Another business dinner. Another evening alone in their 10,000 square foot house. Another night of wondering when their marriage had become a series of calendar appointments and polite conversations. Sarah looked down at her flat belly, where their child was growing despite the odds, despite the timing, despite Robert's obvious displeasure. "Well, little one," she whispered, "it looks like it's just you and me for now." The cardinal outside the window had finished its nest, a perfect circle of twigs and moss nestled in the crook of the oak tree's strongest branch. Sarah watched as the bird settled into its new home, wings folding around the space where its eggs would soon rest. Maybe that was what she needed to do, build a nest strong enough to protect what mattered most, regardless of whether anyone else understood the value of what she was creating. Rebecca Thompson answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency that had made her one of Boston's most sought-after divorce attorneys. "Sarah, this is a surprise. How are you?" Sarah gripped her phone tighter, still sitting in the coffee shop booth while the drama of her public humiliation played out behind her. Victoria's voice had dropped to a hiss, but her words were still audible to anyone paying attention. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something," Sarah said quietly. "Hypothetically." "Oh, honey." Rebecca's tone shifted immediately from professional to personal. "How hypothetical are we talking?" Sarah watched Robert check his watch, probably calculating how long this scene would take to resolve before his next appointment. If a woman in New York discovered her husband was having an affair, what would her options be? Depends on a lot of factors. How long married, any prenups, children, assets. 22 years. Yes to the prenup. One adult daughter, and Sarah's hand moved to her belly. Another child on the way. The silence on Rebecca's end spoke volumes. "Sarah, please tell me this is actually hypothetical." "I wish it were." "Where are you right now?" Sarah looked around the coffee shop, where the barista was wiping down tables with obvious nervousness, while other customers pretended not to stare. "A very public place, having a very private conversation exposed for everyone to see. Can you get somewhere safe, somewhere we can talk properly?" "Safe," Sarah almost laughed. "I don't know what that means anymore. Rebecca, I thought I was safe in my marriage, in my house, in my life. I thought 22 years meant something." "It does mean something, honey. It means you have rights. It means you have options. But I need you to focus for me right now. Are you in any physical danger?" Sarah glanced over at Victoria, who was now jabbing her finger at Robert's chest while he tried to calm her down. "I don't think so, but his mistress just knocked me down in front of half of Manhattan. I'm 6 months pregnant. Rebecca." "She what?" Rebecca's voice went arctic. "That's assault. Have you called the police?" "I called you first." "Okay, listen to me carefully. Document everything. Take pictures if you can do it safely. Get witness contact information. And yes, call the police. This isn't just about your marriage anymore. Sarah, this is about protecting yourself and your baby." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a hardening that she didn't recognize. "What about the prenup? What kind of prenup? Basic asset protection or full waiver?" "I don't know. Robert's lawyers handled everything. I just signed where they told me to sign." The words sounded pathetic even to her own ears. "I was so in love. Rebecca, I trusted him completely." "Okay, first rule, stop beating yourself up for trusting your husband. Second rule, prenups aren't automatically ironclad. There are ways to challenge them, especially if there was any coercion or if circumstances have changed significantly. Like an unexpected pregnancy. Like an unexpected pregnancy. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Don't sign anything else. Don't agree to anything. Don't make any major financial decisions. And for God's sake, don't let him convince you this is all a misunderstanding that you can work through." Behind her, Sarah heard Victoria's voice rise again. "I'm not waiting another 6 months for you to grow a spine. Robert, either you tell her tonight, or I will." "You want me to file for divorce?" Sarah said, the words tasting strange in her mouth. "I want you to protect yourself and your children. There's a difference." Rebecca's voice softened. "Honey, I know this is overwhelming. I know this isn't what you wanted. But sometimes life forces our hand, and when that happens, we have to be smart." Sarah thought about Emma's documentary, about women who reinvented themselves after 50. Had any of them sat in coffee shops listening to their husbands' mistresses plan their destruction? What would I need to do? First, and get somewhere safe and call me back. We'll need to discuss strategy, gather documentation, figure out your financial picture. Do you have access to bank statements, tax returns, investment accounts? Some. Sarah realized how little she actually knew about their finances. Robert handled everything, gave her credit cards and a household account, paid all the bills. She'd thought it was generous. Now she wondered if it had been strategic. Good, we'll need all of that. Also, I want you to start documenting everything. Keep a journal of dates, times, conversations. Record things if you can do it legally in New York. Rebecca, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. What if I'm making a mistake? What if this is just a midlife crisis, and I'm destroying my marriage over something he might regret? Sarah, listen to me. Rebecca's tone was firm but kind. A midlife crisis is buying a sports car or taking up skydiving, having an affair and letting your mistress assault your pregnant wife in public. That's not a crisis. That's a choice. The truth of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. Robert had made choices, probably dozens of them over the past months. He'd chosen to pursue Victoria, chosen to lie to Sarah, chosen to stand by while another woman humiliated her in public. These weren't mistakes or moments of weakness. They were deliberate decisions. Ma'am! The young barista appeared at her table, clearly anxious to resolve the situation. I'm sorry to bother you, but should I call the police? That woman pushed you pretty hard, and you're pregnant. Sarah looked at the girl's concerned face, then at her phone where Rebecca was waiting for an answer, then at her husband who was now escorting Victoria toward the door while she continued her tirade. Yes, Sarah said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. Please call the police. As the barista hurried away, Sarah brought the phone back to her ear. Rebecca, I think I need more than hypothetical advice. I'm proud of you, honey. This is the hardest part, making the decision to fight for yourself. Everything else is just paperwork and strategy. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. Good. Smart people are scared when they're about to do something brave. But Sarah, you're not alone in this. You have me, you have Emma, and you have 22 years of marriage that entitle you to a hell of a lot more than Robert thinks you deserve. Through the coffee shop window, Sarah watched Robert help Victoria into a waiting car. He looked back at the shop once, his face unreadable, before getting in beside her. He didn't look back again. Rebecca, Sarah said, how soon can you get to New York? I'll be on the next train. As sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah realized she was no longer the woman who'd walked into this coffee shop an hour ago. That woman had been a wife, a mother-to-be, a woman who trusted in the permanence of promises made 2 decades ago. This woman, the one sitting alone while police cars pulled up outside, was something else entirely. This woman was going to fight. 3 days after the coffee shop incident, Sarah sat in her Westchester Mansion's library, surrounded by boxes of financial documents and feeling like an archaeologist excavating her own life. Rebecca had arrived from Boston that evening, bringing a legal pad, a digital recorder, and 20 years of experience helping women untangle the complicated knots of long marriages. Start with the bank statements, Rebecca said, settling into the leather chair across from Robert's mahogany desk. We need to understand the full financial picture before we make any moves. Sarah opened the first folder, her hands steadier than they'd been since Monday's humiliation. The police report had been filed. Victoria Lawson was facing charges for assault, and Robert was staying at the Carlisle Hotel while they worked things out. His phrase delivered with the same tone he might use to discuss a minor scheduling conflict. Here's what I don't understand, Sarah said, pulling out their joint checking account statements. We have quarterly financial meetings with Robert's advisor. I see these numbers every 3 months. How could I have missed signs of an affair? Rebecca looked up from her legal pad. Because you weren't looking for signs of an affair, you were looking at investments in college funds and retirement planning. Financial infidelity is different from regular infidelity, and most affairs don't show up in bank statements. But this one does. This one might. Victoria Lawson has expensive tastes, and your husband has been taking her on business trips. Look for charges you don't recognize. Restaurants you didn't eat at, hotels you didn't stay in. Sarah ran her finger down the columns of numbers, her accountant's training from decades ago slowly returning. There, a charge at Le Bernardin, on a night when Robert had claimed to be in Chicago. Another at Cartier, 2 weeks before her birthday, but she'd received no jewelry from Cartier. "Rebecca, look at this." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hands had started to shake again. $15,000 at Harry Winston. 3 days after I told him about the pregnancy. Rebecca leaned forward, studying the statement. "What did you get for your birthday that year?" "Pearl earrings from Tiffany. Maybe $2,000 worth." "So where's the other $13,000? They spent the next 2 hours building a timeline of financial irregularities. Business dinners on weekends when Robert claimed to be playing golf. Hotel charges in cities where his company had no clients. Flowers delivered to addresses Sarah didn't recognize. "This is sophisticated financial infidelity," Rebecca said finally. "He's been careful, but not careful enough. These expenses are all business deductible, which means he's been using company money to fund his affair." Sarah's stomach turned. "Is that illegal?" "It's certainly unethical, and it's grounds to challenge your prenup if we can prove a pattern of financial deception." The front door chimed, and Sarah heard Emma's voice in the foyer. Her daughter had flown in from Los Angeles the day after the coffee shop incident, arriving with suitcases and a fierce determination to support her mother through whatever came next. "Mom." Emma appeared in the library doorway, carrying a tray with coffee and sandwiches. "I thought you might be hungry." Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for this brilliant, fierce young woman who'd inherited the best parts of both her parents. "Emma, you remember Rebecca from college?" "Of course." Emma set down the tray and hugged Rebecca warmly. "Thank you for coming. Mom needs someone in her corner who knows how to fight." "Your mother is stronger than she realizes," Rebecca said. "She just needs to remember that strength." Emma settled on the arm of Sarah's chair, her presence both comforting and energizing. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "The women in my documentary, half of them discovered their husbands' affairs the same way Mom did, through financial irregularities or public humiliation. There's a pattern to how men in their 50s handle midlife transformation." Sarah looked at her daughter with new appreciation. "What kind of pattern?" "They convince themselves their wives are holding them back from some authentic version of themselves. Usually involves a younger woman who represents the life they think they should have had." Emma's voice carried the analytical tone she used in her films. "The irony is that they're not transforming at all. They're just trading one set of responsibilities for another, one woman for another." "That's remarkably insightful," Rebecca said, "and it fits the legal pattern too. Men who claim their marriages are stale or unfulfilling, but who fight viciously to keep the financial benefits of being married." Sarah thought about Robert's reaction to her pregnancy, his careful calculations and scheduling concerns. Had he already been planning his exit when she'd shared the news about their baby? "There's something else," Emma said. "I called my friend Jessica in Dad's PR department. She says Victoria's been at every company event for the past 6 months. Not as a guest or client, as Robert's date." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Company events meant board members, clients, partners. Robert had been parading his mistress in front of their professional community for months while Sarah stayed home, growing their child and planning nursery decorations. "He's been creating a narrative," Rebecca said grimly, "establishing Victoria as his partner in professional settings, making your absence seem natural. This wasn't spontaneous, Sarah. This was strategic." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Can we have dinner tonight? Time to discuss our situation like adults?" She showed the message to Rebecca, who frowned. "Don't agree to anything face-to-face yet. We're not ready." "What if he wants to reconcile?" "Do you want to reconcile?" Emma asked gently. Sarah looked around the library where she'd spent countless evenings reading while Robert worked late, or claimed to work late. She thought about the coffee shop, about Victoria's hands on her husband, about Robert's expression when his mistress had called her pathetic. "I don't know if I can trust him anymore," she said finally, "and I don't know if I can respect a man who would let another woman assault his pregnant wife." "Those are your answers," Rebecca said. "Trust and respect aren't negotiable in a marriage." Sarah typed her response to Robert. "I think we should communicate through lawyers from now on." His reply came immediately. "Don't be dramatic. Sarah, we can work this out." She showed Rebecca the message, and her friend's expression hardened. "Classic manipulation. He creates the crisis, then blames you for being dramatic when you respond to it. We see this constantly. What do we do next? We file, Rebecca said simply. Tomorrow. I want to get ahead of whatever strategy he's developing. As evening fell over the mansion, Sarah found herself standing in the nursery she'd started decorating months ago. The walls were painted a soft yellow, gender-neutral and welcoming. A rocking chair sat in the corner, the same one where she'd nursed Emma 24 years ago. Emma joined her, slipping an arm around her mother's waist. Are you okay? I keep thinking about what you said, about women reinventing themselves after 50. I never thought I'd be one of them. Mom, you're 48 and pregnant. You're about to become a single mother while fighting a millionaire ex-husband for fair divorce settlement? If that's not reinvention, I don't know what is. Sarah felt a smile tug at her lips despite everything. When you put it that way, it sounds almost heroic. It is heroic, Emma said firmly. And Mom, you're not doing this alone. You have me, you have Rebecca, and you have a lot of people who love you. Dad may have forgotten your worth, but the rest of us haven't. That night, as Sarah lay in her empty king-sized bed, she felt her baby move for the first time, a flutter, like butterfly wings, reminding her that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her child's future, for the right to raise this baby in a world where women didn't have to accept narcissistic abuse or financial manipulation. She was fighting for the woman she used to be and the woman she might become. The divorce papers were filed on a Friday morning in November, 2 weeks after the coffee shop incident that had changed everything. Sarah sat in Rebecca's temporary New York office, watching her friend review the final documents with the methodical precision that had made her legendary in family law. Adultery, financial malfeasance, and emotional abandonment, Rebecca said, checking off items on her legal pad. Plus, we're requesting full forensic accounting of all business and personal assets going back 5 years. Robert's going to fight this, Sarah said, one hand resting on her increasingly prominent belly. At 28 weeks, she could no longer hide her pregnancy behind loose sweaters and careful posing. Let him fight. We have documentation, witnesses, and a very sympathetic plaintiff who was assaulted by his mistress in public. Rebecca's smile was sharp. Plus, his girlfriend is facing criminal charges. Not exactly the image Mitchell Holdings wants in their annual report. Sarah's phone buzzed with yet another text from Robert. He'd been calling and messaging constantly since receiving the papers, his tone alternating between wounded husband and calculating businessman. He wants to meet, Sarah said, reading the latest message. Says he can explain everything if I'll just listen. Absolutely not. Not without me present. And not until we've completed discovery. Right now, any contact with him is a chance for him to manipulate or intimidate you. The office door opened, and Emma entered carrying coffee and a grim expression. Mom, you need to see this. She handed Sarah her phone, showing a page 6 article with the headline, Mitchell Holdings CEO's pregnant wife files for divorce amid assault scandal. Sarah's stomach dropped as she read the opening paragraph. Sources close to the family suggest the marriage has been troubled for years, with friends describing Sarah Mitchell as increasingly controlling and jealous as her husband's business success grew. Controlling and jealous, Sarah's voice rose. I haven't been controlling about anything in 20 years. It's a classic PR strategy, Emma said angrily. Dad's hired a crisis management firm. They're trying to control the narrative, make you look like the unstable one. Rebecca was already on her phone. This is exactly why we filed quickly. He's going to try to paint you as an opportunistic wife, using pregnancy to extract money from a successful man. We need to get ahead of this. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone rang. Robert's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, she was tempted to answer. Part of her still wanted to hear him explain, to find some way back to the life she'd thought they shared. Don't, Rebecca said firmly. Anything he says now is either manipulation or evidence. Neither helps you. But the phone kept ringing, and finally Sarah answered. What do you want, Robert? Sarah, thank God. We need to talk. This divorce filing is insane. You're destroying our family over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Sarah's voice was ice. Your mistress assaulted me in public. Robert, you stood there and let it happen. What exactly did I misunderstand? Victoria was upset. She'd been drinking, and she misinterpreted some things I'd said about our marriage. But Sarah, she means nothing to me. You and the baby are my family. The words sounded rehearsed, probably crafted by the same PR firm that had labeled her controlling and jealous. If we mean so much to you, why are you telling Page Six that I'm an unstable gold digger? The silence stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. I didn't authorize that article, Robert said finally. But Sarah, you have to understand. This divorce filing makes me look like I'm abandoning my pregnant wife. My board is furious. Stock prices are affected. You're damaging my company. I'm damaging your company. Sarah felt her blood pressure rising, a dangerous thing in her condition. You're the one who paraded your mistress around business events for months. You're the one who let her attack me in front of witnesses. But somehow this is my fault. Sarah, please, let's meet somewhere private. Just us. We can work this out. No, Sarah said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. We can't work this out. Robert, you made that choice when you decided I was a personal complication that needed handling. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. Good, Rebecca said firmly. He's going to escalate now. Probably try financial pressure. Are you prepared for that? What kind of financial pressure? Frozen credit cards, restricted access to accounts, sudden discoveries that marital assets aren't as substantial as they appeared. It's a common strategy. Make the wife financially desperate so she'll accept a quick, unfavorable settlement. Emma looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through social media responses to the Page Six article. Mom, it's not all bad news. A lot of people are supporting you. There's actually a hashtag, Women Supporting Women, and it's trending. Sarah felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. Really, wait. Look at this. Emma showed her the screen. Women sharing their own stories about financial independence after narcissistic abuse, divorce settlements that changed their lives, midlife transformation. Your situation is resonating with a lot of people. Rebecca leaned over to see the phone. This is good for us legally, too. Public sympathy matters in high-profile divorces, especially when there are business interests involved. As afternoon turned to evening, Sarah found herself reading message after message from women who'd faced similar situations. Wives who'd discovered affairs through financial records. Mothers who'd been called controlling for expecting fidelity. Women who'd rebuilt their lives after decades of marriage ended in betrayal. Their stories gave her strength, but they also revealed a sobering pattern. The women who'd fared best in their divorces were the ones who'd fought from the beginning, who'd refused to be painted as victims or gold diggers. Rebecca, Sarah said finally, what's our next move? We go on offense, full forensic accounting, depositions from his business associates, subpoenas for his travel records and communications. If Robert wants to fight dirty, we'll show him what that really looks like. That night, alone in her mansion, Sarah stood in the nursery and talked to her unborn daughter. The ultrasound that week had confirmed what her heart had somehow known. She was carrying a little girl who would enter the world in the middle of what might be the biggest fight of Sarah's life. Your daddy thinks I'm being dramatic, she whispered to her belly. He thinks I should accept being replaced quietly, gracefully, like a good wife who knows her place. But you know what? Little one, I don't think good wives accept being pushed down by their husbands' mistresses. The baby moved, a strong kick that made Sarah smile despite everything. That's right, she said. We're fighters, you and me. And we're going to show your daddy, and everyone else, what happens when you underestimate a woman who's got nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Outside, November wind rattled the windows of the house where she'd thought she'd grow old with Robert. But inside the nursery, planning for her daughter's arrival, Sarah Mitchell felt stronger than she had in years. The woman who'd been knocked down in that coffee shop was gone. The woman standing in her place was ready for war. December arrived with an early snowfall that blanketed the Westchester estate in pristine white, making the mansion look like something from a Christmas card. Sarah stood at her bedroom window, watching the grounds crew clear the circular driveway, and tried to ignore the fact that this might be her last Christmas in the house where she'd raised Emma. Mom, Emma's voice carried from the doorway. Rebecca's here with news. Sarah turned from the window, her movements careful now that she was 32 weeks pregnant. The baby seemed to grow larger every day, pressing against her ribs and making sleep nearly impossible. But with each passing week, she felt more determined to see this fight through to the end. Rebecca was waiting in the library, her expression unreadable as she spread documents across the conference table they'd set up weeks ago. "We've got problems," she said without preamble, "and we've got opportunities." "Problems first," Sarah said, settling into her chair with Emma's help. "Robert's trying to claim that the baby isn't his." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Emma gasped audibly, and even Rebecca looked disgusted by what she just said. "What?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "His lawyers filed a motion yesterday requesting paternity testing. They're claiming that given the state of your marriage and the timing of the pregnancy, there's reasonable doubt about paternity." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. In all the scenarios she'd imagined, all the ways she'd thought Robert might fight, this hadn't occurred to her. "But that's insane. I haven't been with anyone else in 22 years. The only man I've so much as kissed is my husband." "I know that, and you know that, but it's a legal strategy," Rebecca said grimly. "If he can raise doubt about paternity, he can avoid child support obligations and paint you as an unfaithful wife seeking financial gain." Emma was pacing now, her filmmaker's mind clearly working through the implications. This is character assassination. He's trying to destroy Mom's reputation so completely that no one will believe her version of events? "Exactly," Rebecca confirmed. "It's scorched earth tactics. He's not trying to salvage the marriage or protect his family anymore. He's trying to win at all costs." Sarah pressed her hands to her belly, feeling her daughter's strong heartbeat beneath her ribs. The little girl who'd been conceived during one of the few intimate moments she and Robert had shared in recent months, when he'd been tender and loving and had whispered about how beautiful she was, even at 48. "Can we fight this? We can and we will. But Sarah, I need you to understand what this means. He's going to make this uglier than anything you've imagined. If we proceed, your private life, your marriage, your sexual history, it's all going to be dissected in court." The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the heating system and the distant sound of snowplows on the road. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, planning a nursery and choosing paint colors, believing that her biggest challenge would be managing a pregnancy at 48. "What are the opportunities you mentioned?" she asked finally. Rebecca's expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction. This move was a mistake on his part. It's so obviously vindictive that it's going to backfire spectacularly. No judge is going to look at a wealthy man trying to deny paternity of his pregnant wife's child and see him as the victim. "Plus," Emma added, her voice tight with anger, "I've been documenting everything for months now. I have footage of him talking about the baby, expressing excitement, making plans. If he wants to claim he doubted paternity, we can prove he was lying then or lying now." Sarah looked at her daughter with amazement. "You've been filming this. I'm a documentary filmmaker. Mom, this is what I do. I document truth. And the truth is that Dad was over the moon about this baby until he decided you were inconvenient." Rebecca pulled out another folder. "There's more. The forensic accounting came back, and it's even worse than we thought. He's been systematically moving assets offshore for over a year. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. Sarah, this was planned." "How much?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. $15 million in the past 18 months, hidden in shell companies, offshore accounts, investments in his girlfriend's father's construction business. He's been preparing for this divorce since before you got pregnant." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that Sarah felt almost detached from it. This wasn't the Robert she'd married, the man who'd held her hand during Emma's birth and promised to love her through everything. This was a stranger wearing her husband's face. "What do we do now?" "We expose everything," Rebecca said firmly. "The hidden assets, the affair, the timeline of his deception. We show the court exactly what kind of man we're dealing with." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "I'm picking up some of my things from the house tonight. Please don't make a scene in front of the staff." She showed the message to Rebecca, who frowned. "He can't just show up at the house anymore. The divorce filing establishes your right to exclusive occupancy during proceedings." "Should I call the police if he comes?" "You should call me first. But Sarah, I want you to consider something else. He's trying to intimidate you by showing up unannounced. Don't let him. That evening, as snow continued to fall outside, Sarah heard Robert's Mercedes crunching up the driveway. She was ready for him, sitting in the living room with Emma beside her and Rebecca on speed dial. He let himself in with his key, stamping snow off his expensive shoes and hanging his coat in the front closet as if nothing had changed. But when he walked into the living room and saw her waiting, something flickered across his face. "Sarah," he said carefully, "you look well. I'm 8 months pregnant with your child. Robert, how did you expect me to look? About that." He settled into the chair across from her, the same spot where he'd received the news of her pregnancy months ago. "I think we both know this situation is more complicated than it appears." Sarah felt Emma tense beside her, but she kept her own voice level. "What situation would that be? This pregnancy, the timing, our difficulties." Robert's voice carried the same careful tone he used in board meetings when delivering bad news to shareholders. "I think it's best for everyone if we get some clarity about the biological facts." "Biological facts," Sarah repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air between them. "You want paternity testing for the child we conceived together in our marriage bed." "Sarah, be reasonable. We haven't been intimate regularly in months. You know that. And when this all started, you admitted the pregnancy was unexpected." "Because I thought I was too old to get pregnant." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "Not because I'd been sleeping around behind your back." "I'm not saying you were sleeping around," Robert said, but his tone suggested exactly that. "I'm saying that emotions are running high, and we should deal in facts rather than assumptions." Emma stood up suddenly, her hands clenched into fists. "Dad, do you hear yourself? You're calling Mom a liar about her own pregnancy, your own child." "Emma, this is between your mother and me." "No," Emma said fiercely. "This is about our family. The family you're destroying because you can't handle getting older like a decent human being." Robert's mask slipped for a moment, showing something ugly underneath. "You don't understand the complexities of adult relationships. Emma, your mother and I grew apart years ago. This baby is just her attempt to keep me trapped in a marriage that stopped working long before Victoria came along." The words hung in the room like poison gas. Sarah felt her daughter's pain as acutely as her own, and something inside her finally snapped. "Get out," she said quietly. "Sarah, get out of my house." Her voice was stronger now, carrying the authority of a woman who'd finally seen her husband clearly. "Pack whatever you came for and leave. And Robert, the next time you want to insult me or question my integrity, do it through your lawyers. I'm done pretending you're the man I married." For a moment, she thought he might argue, but something in her expression must have warned him off, because he simply nodded and walked toward the stairs. 20 minutes later, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of his cologne and the echo of words that could never be taken back. "Mom," Emma said softly, "are you okay?" Sarah looked around the living room, where she'd celebrated Christmas mornings and birthday parties, where she'd read bedtime stories and helped with homework and built a life she'd thought would last forever. "You know what?" she said finally. "I think I am." For the first time in months, that wasn't a lie. January wind howled around the corners of the Manhattan courthouse as Sarah climbed the steps, one hand pressed to her lower back where the weight of her full-term pregnancy had settled like a constant ache. At 38 weeks, she was huge, uncomfortable, and absolutely determined to see this through. "You should be home," Rebecca muttered, steadying Sarah's elbow as they navigated the icy steps. "You should be in bed, waiting for labor to start, not fighting your ex-husband in court." "My ex-husband should have thought about that before he decided to question the paternity of his own child," Sarah replied, her breath visible in the frozen air. "Besides, our daughter deserves to see her mother fight for her from the very beginning." Emma walked on Sarah's other side, carrying a briefcase full of documents and wearing the fierce expression she'd inherited from both parents. "The photographer from page 6 is here again," she warned. "They're hoping for another dramatic moment they can spin." Sarah glanced at the cluster of reporters and photographers waiting by the courthouse entrance. 6 weeks of legal battles had turned her divorce into a media circus, with daily articles dissecting every court filing and analyzing every public appearance. "Let them watch," Sarah said. "I'm done hiding." Inside the courthouse, Robert's legal team had assembled like an army. Sarah counted at least 6 lawyers in expensive suits, plus what looked like private investigators and PR consultants. Her own team consisted of Rebecca, 2 junior associates, and Emma with her ever-present camera. "David versus Goliath," Rebecca murmured. "Just how I like it." Robert himself sat at the far table, looking older than his 52 years. The stress of the divorce and the criminal charges against Victoria had taken their toll. His company's stock price had dropped 12% since the scandal broke, and 2 board members had quietly resigned. Sarah took her seat carefully, arranging her maternity dress to accommodate her belly. Almost immediately, she felt her daughter shift restlessly, as if sensing the tension in the room. "Not yet, little one," she whispered. "Let mommy finish this first." The judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, entered with an expression that suggested she'd already heard enough about this case to last a lifetime. She was a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades watching wealthy men try to manipulate the legal system. "I'm going to make something very clear before we begin," Judge Williams said, settling behind the bench. "This court has no patience for media theatrics or character assassination. We're here to resolve the dissolution of a marriage and determine appropriate support for the minor children involved. Nothing more, nothing less." Robert's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Harrison Beck, stood immediately. "Your Honor, we appreciate the court's position, but there are fundamental questions about the legitimacy of the claims being made." "Mr. Beck," the judge interrupted, "are you referring to the paternity issue your client has raised?" "Yes, Your Honor. Given the circumstances of the marriage and the timing of this pregnancy, my client has reasonable concerns." "Mr. Beck," Judge Williams' voice could have cut glass. "I've reviewed the timeline of this pregnancy, the medical records, and the couple's travel schedule. Unless Mr. Mitchell is claiming immaculate conception, the math is quite clear. This motion is denied, and I don't want to hear about paternity again." Sarah felt a surge of vindication so strong she had to grip the table to keep from cheering. Beside her, Rebecca scribbled a note, "Round 1 to us." Beck tried again. "Your Honor, there are also questions about the plaintiff's motivations in filing for divorce. The timing suggests, Judge Williams said dryly, that Mrs. Mitchell filed for divorce after being assaulted by her husband's mistress in a public place. Unless you're arguing that assault is grounds for reconciliation, I suggest we move on to the financial issues." Rebecca stood gracefully. "Your Honor, we've prepared a comprehensive analysis of the marital assets, including several concerning discoveries about hidden wealth." For the next 2 hours, Rebecca methodically presented their case. Bank records showing systematic asset transfers. Travel receipts proving Robert's affair had been ongoing for over a year. Business expenses that clearly funded his relationship with Victoria. But the most damaging evidence came from Emma's documentation. Video clips of Robert discussing the baby, expressing excitement about becoming a father again, making plans for their daughter's future. The contrast between his public statements and his current legal position was devastating. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Williams said during a break, "I'm curious about something. In this video from October, you're clearly discussing nursery furniture for our baby. What changed between October and December that made you question paternity?" Robert's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, I was trying to be supportive during a difficult time." "Or," the judge interrupted, "you were planning your exit strategy and needed a way to avoid child support obligations." Beck jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. The court is making assumptions." "Mr. Beck, I'm making observations based on evidence. Your client spent $15 million hiding assets while publicly celebrating his wife's pregnancy. That suggests planning, not spontaneous doubt." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched her husband's carefully constructed narrative fall apart piece by piece. The forensic accountant testified about offshore shell companies. The private investigator presented evidence of Robert's year-long affair. Even several of Robert's business associates testified about Victoria's presence at company events. But the most powerful moment came when Rebecca played audio from Sarah's recorded phone calls with Robert, legally obtained under New York's one-party consent law. Robert's voice filled the courtroom. "She means nothing to me. Sarah, you and the baby are my family." Then, 3 days later, This pregnancy is just her attempt to keep me trapped in a marriage that stopped working years ago. The contradiction was so stark, so obviously manipulative, that even Beck seemed to realize the case was lost. During the final recess, Sarah struggled to her feet, her back aching and her daughter pressing insistently against her ribs. As she made her way to the bathroom, she passed Robert in the hallway. For a moment, they looked at each other, the man she'd loved for 22 years and the woman she'd become through fighting him. "Sarah," he said quietly, "this doesn't have to end like this. We could still work something out." Sarah looked at him with something approaching pity. Even now, facing complete defeat, he was trying to negotiate, to find an angle that would save him money or face. "Robert," she said gently, "this ended the moment you let another woman push me down while I was carrying your child. Everything since then has just been paperwork." When court reconvened for Judge Williams' ruling, Sarah was ready. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, the judge began. "This court finds that Mr. Mitchell has systematically hidden marital assets, conducted an extramarital affair using marital funds, and attempted to manipulate these proceedings through false claims about paternity." Sarah felt her daughter give a particularly strong kick, as if celebrating. "The court hereby orders the following: all hidden assets will be returned to the marital estate and divided equally. Mr. Mitchell will pay child support of $15,000 per month until the child reaches majority. Mrs. Mitchell will retain the marital home and receive spousal support of $25,000 per month for 10 years. Rebecca was writing furiously, but Sarah barely heard the specific numbers. What mattered was the larger truth she'd fought and won. Her daughter would grow up knowing that her mother had refused to be discarded quietly. "Furthermore," Judge Williams continued, "given Mr. Mitchell's attempts to hide assets and manipulate these proceedings, he will be responsible for all legal fees incurred by both parties." As the gavel fell, Sarah felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in months. The woman who'd been knocked down in a coffee shop had stood up, fought back, and won. But even as victory settled around her like a warm coat, Sarah felt the first unmistakable contraction grip her belly. Their daughter, it seemed, was ready to make her entrance into the world. The labor pains started in the courthouse elevator and intensified with each floor they descended. By the time Sarah reached the lobby, she was gripping Emma's arm and breathing through contractions that felt like her body was being reorganized from the inside out. "Mom," Emma said urgently, "we need to get you to a hospital. Now." "Not yet," Sarah gasped, pausing beside a marble pillar as another wave of pain washed over her. "Rebecca needs to finish the paperwork. Make sure the settlement is properly filed." "Sarah, honey," Rebecca said, appearing at her elbow with a stack of documents, "the paperwork can wait. You're about to have a baby." Sono. Through the courthouse windows, Sarah could see the cluster of reporters and photographers who'd been documenting her legal battle for weeks. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her daughter was choosing to arrive on the same day her mother had finally secured their future. "Mrs. Mitchell," a young court clerk approached nervously. "Judge Williams asked me to tell you that she's expediting the final orders. Everything will be filed within the hour." Sarah nodded her thanks, then doubled over as another contraction hit. When it passed, she looked up to find Robert standing nearby, his face pale and uncertain. "Sarah," he said hesitantly, "do you need me to drive you to the hospital?" The question was so absurd that Sarah almost laughed. "I think you've done enough, don't you?" Emma was already calling for a car while Rebecca gathered their legal documents. As they helped Sarah toward the door, she heard Robert call her name again. "What?" she said, turning back despite Emma's protests. "Will you?" He seemed to struggle with the words. "Will you let me know when she's born?" Sarah studied his face, looking for some trace of the man she'd once loved. What she saw instead was a stranger who'd spent months trying to destroy her and was now asking for the privilege of meeting their daughter. "I'll think about it," she said finally, which was more kindness than he deserved. The ride to Mount Sinai Hospital passed in a blur of traffic and increasingly intense contractions. Emma held one hand while Rebecca handled the logistics, calling doctors and alerting the hospital that they were coming. "This is really happening," Sarah gasped between contractions. "She's really coming." "At the most perfect time," Emma said firmly. "She waited for you to win. Mom, she wanted to be born into freedom. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was waiting when they arrived, her familiar face a welcome sight in the chaos of the emergency room. Well, Sarah, she said with a smile, I see your daughter has excellent timing. Let's get you upstairs and see how far along you are. The next 12 hours passed in the strange, suspended reality of labor. Sarah had forgotten how consuming it was, how completely it demanded every ounce of strength and focus. But this time was different from Emma's birth 24 years ago. This time, she wasn't waiting for a husband to arrive from a business meeting. This time, her support system was complete without him. Emma documented everything with her camera, creating what she called the first chapter of our new story. Rebecca handled the constant stream of legal calls and media requests from the hospital lobby. And Sarah labored knowing that every contraction brought her closer to holding the daughter she'd fought so hard to protect. At 3:47 a.m. on January 15th, Grace Elizabeth Mitchell entered the world with a lusty cry that announced her displeasure at being evicted from her warm, quiet home. She's perfect, Doctor, Walsh said, placing the baby on Sarah's chest. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, and absolutely beautiful. Sarah looked down at her daughter's wrinkled red face and felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of the world. This tiny person had been worth every moment of the past 6 months, every legal battle, every moment of doubt and fear. Hello, Grace, she whispered. I'm your mama, and I have so much to tell you. Emma was crying openly as she filmed the first moments of her sister's life. Mom, she looks just like you did in the old baby pictures. Grace had Sarah's brown eyes and what looked like it might become Robert's dark hair, but her expression, even in these first moments, seemed entirely her own, alert, determined, already taking the measure of her new world. She's a fighter, Sarah said, stroking Grace's soft cheek. She's going to need to be. Over the next few days, visitors streamed through Sarah's hospital room. Emma's filmmaker friends brought flowers and organic baby clothes. Rebecca arrived with champagne she couldn't drink until after breastfeeding and legal documents that made their victory official. Even Judge Williams sent a congratulatory note with a gift certificate for children's books. But the most meaningful visitor was Eleanor Vanderberg, the society matron who'd quietly supported Sarah throughout the divorce proceedings. My dear, Eleanor said, settling into the bedside chair with the grace of someone who'd been navigating high society politics for 60 years. You've given all of us something precious. What's that? Sarah asked, adjusting Grace in her arms. Permission to stop accepting unacceptable behavior from powerful men? Eleanor said simply. Half the women in our circle are married to men who think wealth gives them the right to discard their wives when they become inconvenient. You've shown them a different way. Sarah looked down at Grace, who was sleeping peacefully despite the ongoing conversation. I just wanted to protect her, to make sure she grows up knowing that women don't have to accept narcissistic abuse or financial manipulation. And that lesson will ripple out far beyond this room, Eleanor said. You've started something, Sarah. Women supporting women, refusing to be victims, fighting for financial independence after 50. It's a movement, whether you intended it or not. That evening, as visiting hours ended and the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, Sarah found herself alone with Grace for the first time. She walked slowly around the room, her daughter warm and solid in her arms, and marveled at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a traditional wife focused on managing a household and supporting her husband's career. Now she was a single mother with a substantial divorce settlement, a daughter who documented social justice, and a story that apparently inspired other women to fight for themselves. Your daddy wanted to meet you, she told Grace quietly, but I'm not sure he's earned that right yet. He'll have to prove he can put your needs first, and that's not something he's shown much skill at lately. Grace stirred in her arms, making the soft, snuffling sounds that newborns make while dreaming. But you know what, little one? We don't need him to be happy. We don't need anyone else to be complete. We have each other, and we have Emma, and we have more financial independence than most women ever dream of. Outside the hospital window, New York City glittered in the January night. Somewhere out there, Robert was probably in his hotel room, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life and a reputation that had been shattered by his own choices. Victoria was dealing with criminal charges and the collapse of her carefully planned social climbing, but here in this quiet room, Sarah was beginning something entirely new. Not the life she'd planned, but perhaps the life she'd been meant to live all along. "Welcome to the world, Grace Elizabeth Mitchell," she whispered. "Let me tell you about your mama and all the things we're going to do together." 6 months after Grace's birth, Sarah stood in the empty shell of what would become Second Chance's Cafe, surveying the construction chaos with the satisfied expression of a woman building something entirely her own. Sawdust covered every surface, exposed pipes snaked across the ceiling, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with the aroma of coffee from the functioning espresso machine she'd insisted on installing first. "Mom, this is going to be incredible," Emma said, stepping carefully around construction equipment while filming the renovation process. Her documentary about midlife transformation had evolved to include Sarah's story, and she was documenting every step of the cafe's creation. Sarah adjusted Grace in her arms, marveling as always at how perfectly her daughter fit against her hip. At 6 months old, Grace was a serious baby who studied everything with dark eyes that missed nothing. She seemed particularly fascinated by the construction noise and the parade of workers who stopped to admire her. "The location is perfect," Rebecca said, joining them from her inspection of the kitchen area. She'd driven down from Boston for the cafe's construction milestone, the day the custom furniture arrived. "Right in the heart of Manhattan's business district, walking distance from 3 major law firms specializing in family law. I didn't choose it for the divorce attorneys," Sarah laughed, though she appreciated the irony. "I chose it because it's where women come to think, to work, to make decisions that change their lives." The cafe occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone just off Madison Avenue, close enough to the financial district to attract businesswomen, but far enough from Robert's office building to avoid awkward encounters. Sarah had bought the space with part of her divorce settlement, transforming it from a generic retail shell into something that felt like a combination of living room, library, and sanctuary. "Tell me again about the business model," Emma said, camera rolling as Sarah walked through the space. "Coffee and conversation," Sarah said simply, "but also workshops on financial independence, legal clinics for women considering divorce, support groups for single mothers, a place where women can get practical help along with their lattes." The front door chimed, and Jack Patterson entered carrying blueprints and wearing his perpetual expression of amused satisfaction. The private investigator who'd helped build Sarah's divorce case had become an unexpected friend and was now helping her navigate the complexities of small business ownership. "The security system is installed," he announced, "and I've got contacts at the local precinct who'll keep an eye on the place. Word is getting around about what you're doing here, and not everyone approves." Sarah felt a familiar flicker of worry. The media attention around her divorce had died down, but she still received occasional hostile messages from people who thought she'd been too greedy or vindictive. Some of Robert's business associates had made it clear they considered her a traitor to their social circle. "What kind of disapproval are we talking about?" Rebecca asked, her lawyer instincts immediately engaged. "Nothing actionable," Jack assured her. "Just grumbling from certain circles about women getting ideas above their station. The usual nonsense from men who think successful women are a threat to the natural order." Grace chose that moment to let out an indignant wail, as if she understood the conversation and wanted to voice her opinion about men who felt threatened by women's success. "That's right, sweetheart," Sarah said, bouncing her daughter gently. "Mama's got ideas way above her station, and that's exactly where they belong." The custom furniture began arriving that afternoon, sturdy wooden tables that could accommodate laptops and legal documents, comfortable chairs arranged in conversation clusters, built-in bookshelves that would soon hold everything from financial planning guides to memoirs by women who'd reinvented their lives after 50. But the centerpiece was the collection of chairs Sarah had specially commissioned from a local craftsman. Each one was unique, designed to be both beautiful and unshakable. No one would ever again have a chair kicked out from under them in Sarah's space. "Mrs. Mitchell." A young woman appeared in the doorway, clearly nervous but determined. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard about your cafe. I'm Jessica Chen, and I was wondering—" "Come in," Sarah said warmly, recognizing the look in the woman's eyes. She'd seen it in mirrors for months during her own divorce proceedings, the expression of someone gathering courage to change her life. I read about your case, Jessica said, glancing around the construction zone, about how you fought back when your husband tried to discard you. I'm I'm in a similar situation. My husband is 15 years older, very successful, and he's been having an affair with someone from his office. Sarah handed Grace to Emma and gave Jessica her full attention. How can I help? I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight like you did. I've been a stay-at-home mother for 8 years. I don't have my own career, my own money. I'm scared that if I challenge him, I'll lose everything. You're already losing everything, Sarah said gently. The question is whether you're going to let it happen to you or take control of the process. For the next hour, Sarah, Rebecca, and Jessica sat on construction crates and talked through options, resources, and realistic expectations for what a divorce might look like. By the time Jessica left, she had Rebecca's business card, a list of financial documents to gather, and something she'd been missing for months' hope. That's what this place is really about, Sarah told Emma as they watched Jessica walk away with more confidence than she'd arrived with. Not just the coffee or the workshops, it's about women helping other women believe they're worth fighting for. As evening approached and the construction workers finished for the day, Sarah found herself alone in the cafe with Grace, who was dozing in her carrier. The space was quiet except for the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic and the soft hum of the espresso machine. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, planning nursery colors and believing that her biggest challenge would be managing a pregnancy at 48. That woman had been comfortable but powerless, secure but invisible, loved but not respected. The woman standing in this half-finished cafe was something entirely different. She was a business owner, a single mother, a divorce settlement success story, and apparently an inspiration to other women fighting their own battles. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the article about your cafe in the Times. Wanted you to know you helped me leave my narcissistic husband last month. Thank you for showing me it was possible. A grateful reader. Similar messages arrived daily now, from women across the country who'd read about her case and decided to fight for their own financial independence and self-respect. Emma was collecting them for her documentary, creating what she called a digital sisterhood of women supporting women. Grace stirred in her carrier, opening dark eyes that seemed to take in everything about their new venture. What do you think, little one? Sarah asked softly. Are we going to change the world one coffee conversation at a time? Grace's response was a smile that could have melted the most cynical heart. I'll take that as a yes, Sarah said, lifting her daughter into her arms. Your mama's got big plans for us, Grace Elizabeth. Big plans and the financial independence to make them happen. Outside, Manhattan glittered with the promise of another day, another chance for women to support each other, to fight for what they deserved, to refuse to accept unacceptable treatment from the powerful men in their lives. Sarah Mitchell had found her calling, and it was exactly as revolutionary as Emma had predicted. 1 year later, Sarah stood behind the counter of Second Chance's Cafe, pulling shots of espresso while Grace played in her portable playpen nearby, babbling cheerfully at the regular customers who'd become like family. The morning rush was in full swing, business women grabbing coffee before court appearances, mothers meeting for support group sessions, older women attending Rebecca's weekly Financial Independence After 50 workshops. The cafe had exceeded every expectation Sarah had dared to have. Featured in magazines as Manhattan's Most Empowering Coffee Shop, it had become a pilgrimage site for women seeking inspiration and practical help with life transitions. But more importantly to Sarah, it had become exactly what she'd envisioned, a place where women could find their strength and claim their worth. Sarah. A familiar voice made her look up from the espresso machine. Victoria Lawson stood in the doorway, looking nothing like the polished predator who'd knocked Sarah down 2 years ago. Her designer clothes had been replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face showed the kind of vulnerability that came from having your life completely dismantled. The cafe fell silent. Every regular customer knew the story, knew that this was the woman who'd assaulted their beloved owner. Sarah felt the protective energy of her community rise around her like a shield. What do you want, Victoria? Sarah asked calmly, wiping her hands on her apron. To apologize, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. And to ask if you have any openings for someone who needs a second chance? Sarah studied the younger woman's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. What she saw instead was genuine remorse and the kind of desperation that came from discovering that your carefully planned life was built on quicksand. "Grace, sweetie, go play with Emma in the back office," Sarah said, lifting her daughter from the playpen. At 18 months old, Grace was walking confidently and had developed her mother's ability to read tension in a room. Emma appeared immediately, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Her documentary about women's midlife transformation had premiered at Sundance and was now being distributed nationwide, with Sarah's story as its centerpiece. "Victoria," Emma said coolly, taking Grace's hand. "I didn't expect to see you here. I know you probably think I don't deserve to be here," Victoria said, addressing both women. "And you're probably right, but I've lost everything, and I need to start over. I need to learn how to be someone other than the person I was." Sarah looked around her cafe, at the women who'd found strength and community within these walls. Some were divorce survivors like herself. Others were widows learning to manage finances for the first time. Still others were young mothers trying to balance career ambitions with family responsibilities. All of them had one thing in common: they'd needed a second chance. "What happened to you?" Sarah asked finally. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "The assault charges cost me my job and my reputation. My father disowned me when the family business lost clients because of the scandal. Robert, well, Robert discarded me the moment I became a liability instead of an asset." Sarah felt a flash of something that might have been sympathy. She knew exactly what it felt like to be discarded by Robert Mitchell when you stopped serving his purposes. "I spent the last year in therapy," Victoria continued, "trying to understand how I became someone who would attack a pregnant woman out of jealousy and entitlement. I learned some things about myself that weren't pleasant, such as," Rebecca's voice came from behind the counter. She'd arrived for their weekly business meeting and was clearly prepared to protect Sarah from any manipulation attempt. "Such as the fact that I was raised to believe my worth came from the man I could attract and keep," Victoria said, meeting Rebecca's hostile gaze steadily. "I was taught that other women were competition, not potential allies. I was programmed to see someone like Sarah as an obstacle to overcome, rather than a person deserving of respect." Grace toddled back from the office, drawn by the tension she could feel even if she couldn't understand it. She walked directly to Victoria and offered her a colorful wooden block, her standard gesture of friendship. Victoria knelt down to Grace's level, and Sarah saw tears in the younger woman's eyes. "Hello, beautiful girl," Victoria whispered. "I'm the bad lady who hurt your mama. I'm very, very sorry about that." Grace tilted her head, studying Victoria with the serious expression she'd inherited from both parents. Then she patted Victoria's cheek gently, the way she did when Sarah was sad. "Even my daughter has more emotional intelligence than you showed 2 years ago," Sarah said quietly. "I know," Victoria said, standing slowly. "I know I hurt you terribly, and I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. But Sarah, this place represents everything I never understood about women supporting each other. I want to learn that. I want to be better." Sarah looked at this woman who'd once been her husband's mistress, who'd physically assaulted her in public, who'd tried to destroy her reputation and steal her life. The old Sarah might have harbored hatred, might have enjoyed seeing Victoria's downfall, but the woman she'd become through fighting for her own worth understood something different. Hurt people, and healed people help heal people. "We have an opening for a barista," Sarah said finally. "Minimum wage, no benefits until after 90 days, and you'd have to complete our employee training program on supporting women in crisis." Victoria's eyes widened. "You'd really give me a chance." "I'd give you a chance to earn a chance," Sarah corrected. "This community would have to accept you, and that might take time. You'd have to prove that you understand what this place represents." "I understand," Victoria said quickly. "Or I want to understand. I want to learn how to be someone worth knowing." Emma had been filming discreetly from the back of the cafe, and now she approached with her camera lowered. "This is going to make an incredible epilogue for the documentary," she said thoughtfully. "The full circle of forgiveness and growth." "It's not forgiveness yet," Sarah said firmly. "It's an opportunity. Forgiveness has to be earned through consistent actions over time." Over the following weeks, Victoria proved herself willing to do whatever was asked of her. She cleaned tables, restocked supplies, learned to make coffee, and gradually began participating in the conversations that happened naturally in the cafe's supportive environment. Sarah watched her carefully, looking for signs of the old manipulative behavior. What she saw instead was a woman genuinely trying to rebuild herself from the ground up, learning to measure her worth by her contributions rather than her conquests. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult support group session. A young woman named Maria was crying as she described her husband's financial abuse, his systematic destruction of her self-esteem, his threats about what would happen if she tried to leave. "I feel so stupid," Maria sobbed. "How did I let myself become so powerless? How did I not see what he was doing?" Victoria, who'd been quietly serving coffee, suddenly spoke up. "Because women are taught to be grateful for male attention, even when that attention comes with a price," she said softly. "We're taught to measure our worth by our ability to keep a man happy, even when making him happy requires us to make ourselves smaller." The room fell silent. This was the first time Victoria had contributed to a support group discussion. "I spent 5 years trying to steal another woman's husband," Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger. "I told myself I was fighting for love, but really I was fighting for the security I thought came from being chosen by a powerful man. I never stopped to consider that real security comes from choosing yourself." Maria looked up through her tears. "But how do you learn to choose yourself when you've spent your whole life choosing everyone else?" "You start by surrounding yourself with women who've already learned that lesson," Victoria said, glancing around the room. "You listen to their stories, you watch how they've rebuilt their lives, and you practice making decisions based on what serves your growth rather than what serves someone else's ego." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, but the beginning of it. Victoria was learning the same lessons Sarah had fought so hard to master, that women's worth wasn't dependent on male approval, that financial independence was a form of self-respect, and that supporting other women was the most revolutionary act a woman could perform. As the support group ended and women began filtering out into the Manhattan evening, Victoria approached Sarah's counter. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me a chance to become someone better." Sarah looked at this woman who'd once tried to destroy her life and now spent her days helping other women build theirs. "You're welcome," she said. "But Victoria, remember, becoming someone better is a choice you have to make every single day." "I know," Victoria said, "and I choose it. Every day, I choose it." Later that evening, after the cafe had closed and Grace was asleep in her stroller, Sarah stood in the doorway looking out at Madison Avenue. 2 years ago, she'd been knocked down on a coffee shop floor, humiliated and betrayed. Tonight, she was the owner of a thriving business, the mother of a happy toddler, and the inspiration for a movement of women supporting women across the country. Emma joined her in the doorway, camera in hand as always. "Mom, do you ever miss it, the old life? The security of being married to a millionaire ex-husband?" Sarah considered the question seriously. She thought about the mansion in Westchester, about never having to worry about bills or business decisions or single parenting challenges. She thought about the woman she'd been when her biggest concerns were choosing paint colors and managing household staff. "You know what I miss," Sarah said finally. "I miss believing that love was permanent and that promises meant something. But I don't miss being powerless. I don't miss having my worth determined by someone else's choices." Grace stirred in her stroller, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. Sarah smoothed her daughter's dark hair, marveling at how peaceful she looked. "This little girl will grow up knowing something I had to learn the hard way," Sarah continued. "She'll know that her worth isn't dependent on any man's approval. She'll know that financial independence isn't selfish, it's survival. And she'll know that women supporting women isn't just nice, it's necessary." Emma was crying quietly behind her camera. "Mom, you've built something incredible here. Not just the cafe, but this whole community of women learning to value themselves." "We built it," Sarah corrected. "All of us together. Every woman who shared her story, every woman who offered support to another, every woman who chose to fight for herself instead of accepting unacceptable treatment." As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last look around her cafe. The custom chairs that could never be kicked out from under anyone. The bookshelves full of resources for women in transition. The bulletin board covered with success stories from women who'd found their strength within these walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women seeking support, New opportunities to prove that midlife transformation was not only possible, but powerful. Victoria would continue learning how to rebuild herself with integrity instead of manipulation. Emma would finish her documentary and start planning her next project, exploring women's stories that needed telling, and Sarah would continue serving coffee and hope in equal measure, proving every day that being knocked down was just the beginning of learning how to stand up stronger. "Come on, Grace," she whispered to her sleeping daughter. "Let's go home. Tomorrow we get to change the world again, one conversation at a time." The chair that had once been kicked out from under her had become the foundation for something unshakable. And Sarah Mitchell, single mother and cafe owner, had learned that sometimes the best revenge was living so well that your former oppressor asked for a job. As they walked into the Manhattan night, Grace safe in her stroller and Emma documenting their journey, Sarah smiled at the perfect symmetry of it all. She'd started this story as a victim of narcissistic abuse and financial manipulation. She was ending it as a woman who helped other women discover their own power. And that, she thought, was exactly the kind of transformation the world needed more of.